There is a shortage of Uber drivers right now, and customers or riders are facing long waits to catch an Uber and are also seeing increased fees. I don't take a lot of Ubers, but I just recently got back from Florida. I was down in Tampa, St. Pete, Sarasota for the past couple weeks, and recently got back. And really, that's the only time I really take Ubers for the most part is when I travel. But I did notice Uber fares were extremely high. Rental cars are extremely high right now, too. I don't know if you guys have heard the stories. Some people are paying $800 to $1,000 per day for like a compact rental car. I know in Hawaii there was a story recently where people are literally renting U-Hauls to just be their get-around car on vacation because there's such a shortage. Now, I haven't dug in a ton into the reason for this, but from the little bit of reading I did about it, my understanding is that during the pandemic, a lot of people stopped traveling. A lot of these companies were in trouble and they started selling off their fleets of cars. I imagine the production of new cars probably also got halted too with a lot of factories being shut down. But basically, there's just, these rental car companies just don't have enough cars. Normally, and I don't get rental cars a lot, but normally I can find like a compact car for $15, $17 a day. Most of the rates I was finding for even something like a Chevy Spark was like $65 a day. I think the best rate I wound up finding was about $35, and it wasn't a pickup at the airport. I had to pick it up at a place, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes outside of Tampa Airport. So just that ride, 15 minutes down the road, a couple miles, I think wound up costing me like $46. Some of the quotes, me, my girlfriend, and my buddy were all opening our Uber and Lyft apps, and the quotes range from like $45 to I think like $68. On the way back to the airport, we stopped at the rental car place, again, just a couple miles from the airport. I think we paid $45 for the ride back, but it took 27 minutes for an Uber to come pick us up. And in my experience, I'm used to an Uber almost always being like 7 minutes or less away. If I'm in, kind of a hot area of Chicago, near bars, restaurants, etc., normally like the second I click for a ride, it says finding driver, and literally somebody's pulling up like right that second. When I got back to Chicago, obviously all the Uber drivers line up for airport rides, so there's always a queue. So it didn't take a long time to get an airport ride, but just getting a 25-minute ride to my house from the airport, I think it wound up costing $73. So my buddy actually took the blue line to get away from the airport a little bit and then paid for like a $40 Uber ride. But yeah, I mean, Ubers seem to be taking a long time to arrive and people are paying more. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. We're going to be taking a look at two different articles. One comes to us from ARS Technica, and the other comes to us from The Verge. So, I know I personally don't consider driving for Uber or Lyft to be a side hustle. I know a lot of people talk about it like it's a gig economy and a side hustle. To me, for something to qualify as a side hustle, it has to be something that has some upside or has the ability to scale, right? Like if you start selling graphic design gigs on Fiverr, that could, develop into a freelance career. You could open an agency. You could do something bigger. There's really nobody who goes from being an Uber driver to like opening up their own taxi company. I shouldn't say nobody, but I mean, it's very rare. It's not easy to scale. Like legally, it's not even something you'd be allowed to do without getting additional insurance and additional licensing. Like a taxi cab medallion, whatever that requires. So it's not really something that can scale. So I don't really consider it a true side hustle or you to be a true business owner. But, a hustle's a hustle, a grind's a grind. Some people want to drive Uber or do some type of gig economy thing to make some money to put into crypto, to make some money to launch their Shopify store, to launch their dropshipping business. And I know a lot of people in kind of the make money online crowd or looking to make money outside of a job. Uber and Lyft and these things are oftentimes one of the first places that people start to look before they really kind of start to develop their skills. If you guys are interested in driving Uber, there's probably, it's probably not a terrible time to do so. It seems like, obviously supply and demand. If there's less drivers, or there's, they're likely going to have to do more surges, raise the pay, etc. And I believe Uber is doing some kind of like $200 million bounty, issuing additional money, trying to get drivers out on the road. So let's read the article from ARS Technica. Riders face long waits as Uber and Lyft struggle to recruit new drivers. Riders are flooding back to ride-hailing apps. Drivers, not so much. And, I think part of it, we're hearing a lot these days about how with all the additional unemployment and stimulus and everything else, people aren't wanting to work. I don't know how much of that is played up, how true that is. I will say I've had two different occasions where I've been getting my coffee at Dunkin' Donuts in the morning, and I hear two guys behind me talking, And one guy was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" You could tell these guys were both contractors. You would tell they kind of knew each other, but didn't talk a lot. And one guy's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I had started my own business, but I think I'm going to go back and work for somebody." And the guy was like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" He said, "Well, I can't find any employees." And then he went on to bitch about the stimulus and people are collecting $800 a week to sit home and do shit. Nobody wants to work. I'm going to have to wind up going back to work for somebody else. And then the other guy was kind of echoing that. And we're kind of hearing, there was a story recently that I think it was down in Tennessee or Texas or something like that. McDonald's is paying people $50 just to show up for a job interview. Not a signing bonus, not a starting bonus, $50 just to show up for a job interview. So it is tough to get people to work. I also imagine that some people who used to be Uber and Lyft drivers stopped doing so during the pandemic. Probably because partially there just weren't any riders. So why am I going to sit around in the parking lot for 8 hours a day to only get a handful of rides? I'm sure other people were worried about health concerns. But after sitting out of it for so long, I'm sure a lot of people went and found traditional jobs or moved on to something else. And, not a lot of people are going back to ride sharing. So the article begins, around this time last year, Uber and Lyft saw demand plunge for their flagship ride-hailing service as fear of coronavirus kept most people at home. By May of 2020, Uber's ride bookings had plunged by 80% from their level a year earlier. But now, as people get vaccinated and some states are relaxing public health restrictions, demand for rides is soaring, and Uber and Lyft are struggling to recruit new drivers to meet their needs. It takes forever to get an Uber now, a man outside Boston's Fenway Park told the local NBC 10 television station. Another man who had just completed an Uber trip to Fenway said he'd waited 16 minutes for his driver to arrive. And you know what? I mean, that's long for an Uber. It's long what we're used to. But I think kind of, there's no secret that we live in the I want it now kind of era, right? You order something off Walmart or Target, it's delivered same day. Amazon Prime has same day delivery, 2-day delivery, delivery within a couple hours in some cases. We stream movies instead of renting them. Like, we expect everything now. And, 16 minutes for a car to arrive isn't necessarily terrible compared to, I remember the days of taxi cabs where, 30 minutes, an hour and a half, and who knows if the guy's even going to show up. So it shows how much we've been conditioned, to kind of enjoy fast, convenient rides. Uber is stepping up recruitment. It's not surprising that drivers would be in short supply. The risks of catching COVID-19 haven't gone away, so people are still taking a health risk when they take passengers. What I kind of disagree with this, if you're going to say people are concerned about catching COVID so they're not driving, I would imagine that ridership that riders would have the same concern. Obviously, drivers come into contact with a lot more people than riders come into contact with their one Uber driver. But, it's like sex. They say you fuck one person, you fucked everybody they've ever fucked before. Same thing. If, even though you're only coming into contact with one Uber driver, if that Uber driver has come into contact with 100 different people, you have the germs of those 100 different people. So if we're going to say that drivers are down because people are scared of COVID, we would also have to assume that riders are down, and then that would kind of balance out the whole supply and demand thing. At the same time, the economy is bouncing back, bolstered by last year's high savings rates and lavish stimulus spending. Many people who were working as Uber or Lyft drivers in early 2020 have moved on to other jobs. More fundamentally, recruiting drivers takes time and effort. Uber and Lyft spent billions of dollars building up their pool of drivers in the first place. Uber says that as a result of driver shortages, drivers can make a lot more money than they did before the pandemic. One of the best paying cities is Philadelphia, where Uber says drivers are making an average of $31 per hour. Other high paying cities include Chicago, almost $29 an hour, Miami and Phoenix, both about $26 an hour. These figures include the driver's time waiting between rides, but they don't include expenses, which Uber says averages about $4 per hour. On Wednesday, Uber announced plans to sweeten the pot further by offering drivers incentives worth $250 million. Some regions face specific challenges. While ride-hailing companies are facing shortages across the country, some regions have been hit especially hard. Boston is one of them. Uber says Boston area riders are suffering particularly long wait times because Governor Charlie Baker has declared a state of emergency that effectively prohibits Uber from using surge pricing. Not sure why that would be. Surge pricing helps to balance supply and demand, not only by paying drivers more, but also by encouraging riders to wait or take an alternative form of transportation. Meanwhile, in California, Uber says it's reconsidering features that let drivers in the Golden State see ride destinations and set their own prices. The changes were adopted early last year as part of Uber's effort to convince the courts that drivers were independent contractors rather than employees, but Uber recently told the San Francisco Chronicle that the system wasn't working well, that drivers were cherry-picking the most lucrative rides and declining the rest. That exacerbates the already poor user experience created by the driver shortage, since it means that customers with less lucrative rides may struggle to match with the driver. And you know what? I think it'll be interesting to see what winds up happening. Obviously, there's a lot of debates going on in the courts right now and in various states, and even in Europe and the UK and other countries about whether Uber drivers are employees or contractors. Now, personally, I think the business model only works if they're contractors. Uber wasn't necessarily intended to be a full-time income, right? It was a way to fill a gap. If your roommate moves out and you're short on rent and you need to come up with some money really quick, you can't go get a job because then you're waiting like 2 pay cycles to get paid. Uber, you can turn it on, start driving, and start getting paid right away. I had one buddy who drove for, a couple weeks leading up to his wedding to make a little bit of extra money. You're really not making a whole lot of money. Essentially, you're kind of taking a cash advance out of your car. But for some people at certain times, that winds up working. If drivers wind up being declared to be employees, Uber isn't going to pay people to sit around in parking lots waiting for rides. So what you're going to wind up seeing is you're going to have a lot of drivers in busy urban metropolitan areas because there's always people riding, and Uber drivers aren't going to have any downtime, right? They're going to go from ride to ride to ride, and they're going to have another ride lined up before they complete their current ride. But if you're out in the suburbs and even more so, more rural areas, right now, there's some drivers who may not mind turning on the app and sitting at a coffee shop and waiting for a ride to come in. But Uber isn't going to pay people to do that. So what you're ultimately going to wind up having is either no Uber drivers in certain areas or very few Uber drivers in certain areas. And people are just going to have to wait a long time for a ride because Uber would rather have customers wait than pay employees pay employees to sit around doing nothing. Let's read some of these comments as I think these might be interesting. Neo Morpheus says, I take both every day and I can testify that the long waiting times are usually around 10 minutes for a car to arrive. On weekends, it's a lot worse. Last Saturday, I waited for almost 25 minutes for one to finally show up. What is worse, though, is that drivers are falsely accusing me of not wearing a mask simply because they don't like the route. Even worse, that goes on your profile and you will receive a threatening email warning you that you will be banned from the service. And piling up on this, the app, neither the email lets you defend yourself. To do this, you simply then have to reach out to one of their customer supports on Twitter. Simply insane. And it seems that goes both ways. I hear a lot of drivers complaining that people claim that they're not wearing masks in order to get free rides. Let's see. Wait, your independent contractors are cherry-picking the most lucrative rides. They're not lining up to drive grandma 3 blocks to the grocery store. The way to solve that, make them employees. Another wrinkle from Massachusetts is that their vehicle inspection program is down after a cyber attack. With no concrete timing for coming back up, inspections that expire in March have supposedly been extended to the end of April, but that is a language they use to describe that exhaustion. The RMV has reached out to law enforcement to ask for consideration for expired stickers to ensure motorists do not face fines or penalties as a result of the system being down. Yeah, that's not exactly the sort of assurance that makes me want to rush out and drive all day. Let's look at a few more comments. Is there any information in terms of how many drivers are driving full-time? Because if a lot of them had other primary jobs, they could very well have been disrupted by the pandemic or lost their ability to afford a car or moved on to some other career. I have an 8 a.m. flight next month and planning on grabbing a hotel room by LAX, someplace with their own airport shuttle, as soon as the free car certificate from my Marriott credit cards posts on my account, precisely because of this. You could already have super long waits early in the morning pre-pandemic, so I really don't want to gamble now with such an early flight. Let's see. Wait, you're independent. Okay, we saw that one. They're totally not employees. If they were, they'd be less likely to go fuck ourselves. Uber's legal team. I believe, let's see. You mean the companies that fight like a Wolverine high on angel dust to insist that the drivers are independent contractors and not actual employees are going so far as to help California with the bullshit and getting that nonsense Prop 22 passed so as to not have to provide a modicum of benefits to them, are having trouble filling driver's seats. I don't think an electron scanning microscope can see the violin I'm playing for these fuckfaces. You would need Ant-Man suits to shrink into the quantum realm. So yeah, people have strong opinions on this. Let's take a look at The Verge just because it's interesting to get different perspectives. Uber and Lyft have a driver shortage problem and it's costing them a lot of money. Uber says it will spend $250 million on a stimulus for drivers. Let's see how long. Okay, it's a short article. We'll read it. Uber and Lyft have a driver shortage problem, with the number of US-based drivers for both apps down around 40%. The two companies are pledging to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to lure back people into the driver's seat. Uber announced Wednesday that it was launching a $250 million stimulus for drivers in the hopes of speeding their return to the platform. In 2020, many drivers stopped driving because they couldn't count on getting enough trips to make it worth their time. Dennis Sinelli, Uber's vice president for mobility in the US and Canada, wrote in a blog post, "In 2021, there are more riders requesting trips than there are drivers available to give them, making it a great time to be a driver." Lyft, meanwhile, is covering the cost of rental cars, offering $800 bonuses to drivers to return to the app, and doling out extra cash to drivers when a trip lasts longer than 9 minutes, according to the Financial Times. The hope that these incentives can help persuade those drivers who logged off after being discouraged by the lack of drivers to come back eventually. A major challenge for this effort, though, is that COVID-19 continues to be a huge drag on Uber and Lyft's respective businesses. I guess so. I was going to say, if you have more riders than drivers, your business must be doing pretty good. But I guess if both are down, both are down. As case numbers spiked over the winter, both companies lost a significant portion of their customer base. People stayed at home, or when they did go out, they opted not to use ride-hailing apps. In the last quarter of 2020, Uber said it had only 93 million monthly active platform users. Its term for users who take at least one ride on Uber or buy at least one meal on Uber Eats. A 16% decrease over the year. Meanwhile, Lyft reported a drop in monthly active users of 45%, from 22 million in the fourth quarter of 2019 to 12.5 million in 2020. Uber claims the demand is coming back, though how much we won't know until the company reports its first earnings report for 2021. It seems logical that as vaccination rates continue to go up, more people will start using Uber and Lyft again, but that will depend on many factors, including offices reopening, leisure activities returning, business travel rebounding, and people starting to return to their daily routines. According to data from Apptopia, the number of US-based drivers logging into Uber during the first 3 months of 2021 was down by 37.5% year over year. Lyft saw a 42.3% drop over the same period. Last year, both companies were focused on reducing costs, and that often meant actively constraining its supply of drivers. In its last report, Lyft said that it had to block new drivers from joining the app in some markets, while reducing its spending on marketing and other incentives. Given the effect on demand, we were able to reduce driver acquisition and incentive spend, which had a positive effect on our financial results, Lyft CEO Logan Green said in an earnings call. With wait times increasing in some cities, the companies will now have to reverse course and spend money to encourage drivers to come back to the app. So if any of you guys are Uber or Lyft drivers, I'd love to hear from you. Are you getting a lot more rides? Are people complaining about long ride times? Are you earning more money? For those of you guys who take Uber or Lyft, are you experiencing longer pickup times or higher fees? Drop a comment down below. Let us know. If you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click that subscribe button down below, ring the bell, and we'll catch you on the next video. Later, guys.